Some biographies are, well, they're much more than just history. They feel more like institutional wrecking balls. They force us to look at the very nature of privilege, the cost of deference, and where the limits of accountability lie inside these huge structures of power.
And that's when it gets really interesting. When a book makes you hold the institution accountable, and then you have to critique the methods of the critic, too.
Exactly. That's where the real learning starts. We believe that some books must be challenged. This critique uses, as appropriate, a step-by-step critical thinking framework that maps claims to evidence. We also apply an intellectual framework, and we use the Golden Rule and the U.S. Preamble to identify ethical asymmetries. We conclude with a logical analysis, a balanced conclusion.
And you're experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book critique.
Today, we are taking a close look at the core claims and the structural critique in Andrew Lownie's entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York.
It's a heavy hitter.
It is, and our mission is to figure out if this biography really justifies the moral outrage it builds, or if it's, well, maybe just inviting us to enjoy the spectacle of a very public downfall.
It really is a study in excess, and the book is built, I think, to give you that feeling of inevitability.
Okay, so let's unpack that core thesis. Lowney isn't just presenting the Duke and Duchess of York as, say, flawed people.
No, it goes much deeper.
The central claim is that they are these long-term embodiments of entitlement itself, and that they were allowed to operate inside an institution that, for decades, resisted any real accountability.
Right, until it was basically cornered by the law and, of course, overwhelming public opinion.
The individual characters are the hook, but they seem to serve a larger institutional point.
Exactly. Andrew is characterized as this spoilt prince unable to connect.
Yeah.
Right. While Sarah is shown as being driven by this deep insecurity that comes out as this compulsive status seeking.
And the book's point is that their choices had consequences that radiated way beyond just family drama.
Oh, absolutely. Impacting staff, public finances, and ultimately national trust in the institution.
So the personal flaws are the fuse, but the structural claim is the real dynamite here.
That's the backbone of the whole work. It argues that the modern British monarchy didn't just passively allow this. It actively enabled and protected it.
How so?
By using royal rank as a shield. An impenetrable one, really. It insulated Andrew from the kinds of consequences any other public figure would have faced.
And that insulation had a price tag.
A very real one. Lownie is clear that taxpayers were implicated. They helped sustain these lifestyles that were becoming harder and harder to justify.
Not just ethically, but financially, too.
Precisely. So the book is really two things at once, a joint biography and a case study in how a reputation completely collapses inside a very insulated institution.
Okay, but if the claims are that big, the investigative work behind it has to be absolutely rock solid. We have to map those claims to the evidence.
We do.
And we're talking about 4 years of research, extensive freedom of information requests, court papers.
And interviews. Over 100 interviews with sources who had never spoken on the record before.
The sheer depth of that research shows real intellectual perseverance. You can't deny that.
You can't. But this is also where the tension begins, right? Because the book's marketing promises eye-watering revelations, a jaw-dropping account of greed.
Right. It's designed to sell.
So the critical question for us becomes, does the evidence collected truly support the emotional weight of those claims?
Especially with the really salacious details. Things like alleged sexual habits, outbursts at staff, even alleged physical altercations at family gatherings.
Exactly. Does the standard of corroboration rise to meet the sensational charge those stories create? We have to be so careful to distinguish fact from inference and from, well, outright gossip.
We have to insist that the level of evidence matches the gravity of the accusation. Okay, let's move from the evidence to the ethics. This is where we need to apply a clear moral framework. Let's start with the Golden Rule.
Treating others as you'd wish to be treated.
And when you look at the conduct described in the book, it just fails that test over and over again.
Repeatedly. Reports of verbal abuse toward palace staff, financial dealings that seem to exploit status for personal gain.
And of course, the friendships, particularly with Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes. That exposes a profound disregard for victims and for the public trust a monarchy is supposed to represent.
The ethical asymmetry is just so sharp. The power dynamic is key.
It is. Those on the receiving end staff, business partners, victims, they simply lack the power to refuse or to speak out.
Not without risking everything. And that disparity is what allowed the behavior to go on for so long.
And that erodes the higher ideals we expect from our institutions. If you apply the principles from, say, the U.S. preamble, justice, domestic tranquility, general welfare, this kind of behavior directly undermines civic trust.
It has to. Launer's implicit argument is that unchecked privilege inside a constitutional monarchy over time corrodes two things.
What are they?
First, the institution's own moral legitimacy, and second, the social contract that says everyone is accountable before the law.
And when the public sees one rule for them and another for the elite, the whole system starts to lose credibility. The institution's need to protect itself came at the expense of its integrity.
You know, this intense focus on the flaws of the powerful, it can be a lot. It can be all-consuming.
It's easy to get lost in the scandal.
It is. So before we dig into the book's logical structure, this feels like a good moment to pause. For a moment of reflection for you, the listener. Mindful moment, just pause and ask yourself this. What does my interest in this story, in this downfall, really say about me as a reader? The book invites legitimate outrage for sure, but it also gives us this vicarious window into extreme luxury sex scandal.
A potent cocktail.
And it risks turning real institutional failures and real victims into something like serialized entertainment.
Ethically, it's so important to examine your own goal in reading this.
Yeah.
Are you trying to understand how power corrupts and how institutions reform? Or are you just there for the satisfaction of watching the powerful fall? We have to consciously draw a line between critical analysis and simple voyeurism.
And keeping that distinction alive so that our curiosity becomes a tool for moral reasoning, that's what we aim for. At Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel, we offer AI book analysis, summaries, critiques, and podcasts, all designed to inspire that kind of reflection and rational thought.
Okay, so let's pivot now to the logical structure of the book itself.
Yes. And I think it's at its most coherent, its most persuasive, when it's tracing Andrew's public trajectory.
From Falklands war hero to national disgrace.
That is a very strong, very clear causal arc.
It is, and it aligns perfectly with what a good biography should do. It should illuminate something true about character. Lownie connects documented traits, impulsiveness, that deep entitlement, a lack of
And
empathy.
to specific decisions.
Yes, to the decisions that directly led to his loss of public roles, military honors, and ultimately his place in public life.
So the collapse isn't presented as an accident. It's the logical, predictable outcome of character flaws that were never checked.
It creates this powerful sense of inevitability. But there are logical limits too, weak spots.
Of course. Every biography has them.
And they tend to happen when a single source anecdote, maybe a really dramatic one, is asked to carry too much interpretive weight.
Or when the text starts to blur the line between what was widely believed in certain circles and what is actually established fact.
A critical reader has to watch for that. When the evidence base narrows to just one person's account, you have to adjust your confidence in that claim. It's so tempting to treat every shocking detail as settled fact just because it's in print.
We have to resist that temptation and distinguish between a reasoned inference and pure gossip. So when we put it all together, what's the final verdict on the book's achievement?
Well, entitled is, without a doubt, a compelling and deeply researched political royal biography.
It really does succeed in exposing how deference and secrecy can build this protective bubble around harmful behavior.
A bubble that only bursts when outside legal systems and public scrutiny finally become too powerful to ignore.
And its core message is that the collapse wasn't an accident. It was the predictable result of these long-standing ethical failures.
But that central tension still remains, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The book condemns a kind of voyeuristic entitlement.
While relying on the spectacle of scandal and downfall to attract its readers.
I think the critically minded reader gets the most out of it by seeing the book as two things at once.
Which are?
It's powerful evidence against the abuse of power, yes. But it's also a fascinating case study in how commercial nonfiction packages moral outrage for mass consumption.
And the final challenge isn't just to read the revelations, but to ask what reforms should actually follow them. We acknowledge that this critique draws on biographical descriptions, marketing copy, and early reviews of entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York, and applies those sources through the lenses of critical thinking, ethical analysis, and institutional critique, without reproducing the book's own language or spoilers. Click the link on screen for the in-depth book analysis, then subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.